everyone. Welcome to our fourth episode of the Meerkat Squad podcast. I am Joris Leshen.
And I'm Sheila Henson, and today we are joined by Daisy Onubogu, a public intellectual who thinks and talks about human behavior, in particular neurodivergence.
And also our friend.
Hi, Daisy. I'm so excited to have you here.
Hello. So glad to be here. So excited.
Today we're going to talk about making sense of the world with AuDHD.
Something that I speak with my clients and friends about so often is the AuDHD, or more specifically, autistic need for sense making in the world. Autistics can become so dysregulated and have such a difficult time with things not making sense or not feeling complete, or that is something that I hear constantly from my autistic and AuDHD clients. And this is something that I spoke with Daisy about at length. And she has come up with her own, I think that every autistic person comes up with their own way of coping with this, how to make sense with the world and how to make peace with things that don't make sense, and that aren't, logical or precise, all of those things. And I am so fascinated by the way that Daisy has done this. She has done this in a more structured and more comprehensive way than any other autistic that I've spoken to. And honestly, I don't hear enough autistic people on social media or in academia talking about this particular thing and the tools for it. And so today, Daisy's going to talk to us about her experience with making sense of the world and her life. And so, Daisy, can you tell us a little bit about what led you to doing this process?
Yeah, I think the reason, autistic people get so dysregulated, as you say, by things not making sense is that we have to manually order our steps. We have to choose our actions because we, don't have that sense of resonance, that automaticity that neurotypical people have, where in which you just sort of tune in and you find yourself saying things and doing things and moving your limbs sort of relatively automatically. We have to choose what's going on here, what should I be doing in relation to what's going on here, and then what's the outcome I'm optimizing for, et cetera, et cetera. So all of that like cognitive process needs information. Like if you're trying to assess this person is looking at me, what should I be doing in relation to them? You need information about what their face shape that they're pulling their expression into means, and then what you should say in return, etc. So all of that means that basically in order to function in the world, you need at minimum an understanding of what the cues indicate and what responses go with those cues. That's all data that you have to gather relatively manually. And you do that by watching other people. You do that by watching back what you've done in the past that garnered good outcomes versus bad outcomes. You do that by conversation, etc. But you get drawn in, I think, quite automatically and quite naturally into this data mining and synthesizing process just by virtue of trying to move through the world. The question of how far you go with it then, that is a question. But I think at minimum, if I think about it as sort of concentric circles, then the sort of innermost one just being social cues, social rules, social behaviors, human dynamics, etc., day-to-day interactions, what do those entail? Then that I think is almost non-negotiable to a degree. In fact, I think that is what the autistic experience is primarily founded on, is getting in trouble by doing that wrong versus getting not in trouble or getting good outcomes by doing that really well. And then from there, you might then keep going and trying to continue to make sense of the world in order to keep making your way through every possible interaction as well as you can. And I think it's a question of maybe curiosity and in what path your lives take, at how deeply you pursue information about how the world works, and how far you go, I guess, to make sure that your database is as comprehensible and comprehensive as possible.
So my experience of autistic sense making is probably, I think I went the opposite way of Daisy, but something that is much more recent. That it's only a few years ago, I would say, that I've had that I'm opening myself up to the mystery of life and learning to be comfortable with not knowing, not just tolerating not knowing, but being comfortable with it, appreciating it like a piece of art. Like art is something that you can't really explain why it makes you feel the way it makes you feel, but you just enjoy the ride. And this is a little bit how I try to approach things, especially in connection with my decolonial work, because as I try to decolonize myself, I understand that many of the answers that we've been given, what we thought we knew, a lot of it is tainted by a specific way of seeing things from a specific position in society, rather colonized. And I'm also learning indigenous knowledge and speaking with people who are close to indigeneity. I think that it gives room for nuance and cyclicality and uncertainty. And so this is what I'm leaning towards now. But not to say that there's one way is correct or the other, but I think it's great that we have today we have like different approaches. Yes, it's
I think that's
that's the
super
beauty of
necessary. I
it.
think there's no, if I can just jump in, I think that's necessary. I think there's no way for you to reach a sense of equilibrium and stability and feel like you broadly understand the world without accepting that you won't know everything, and that the experience of standing in uncertainty is one that you can bear and withstand and
Yeah,
hopefully even find beauty in, because you're only going to fill in. There's only so much you can learn while you're here, and there's also some things that cannot, I think, be cognitively understood anyway. But you sort of build
yeah,
your scaffolding with all the data that can be there. You try to build in terms of what you really need most and forego whatever you can do without, and then also concede that no matter how far you go in any direction, there will be what you can't account for, and you just have to be okay with that, and then just keep making your peace with whatever you can like make out of the data that you've gathered so far. And I think that's super critical. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that each of you have sort of a slightly different but nuanced take on this. And I love listening to all the different autistics that I work with and live with and am friends with, talk about how they've coped with this really interesting need for struggling with the unknown, needing things to make sense, needing things to feel complete. And I just, as an holistic person, it makes me so much about learning about the autistic experience makes me more analytical about my human experience, right? That's one of the reasons why I enjoy spending time with autistic people. And like, it's just so interesting because, of course, the unknown is uncomfortable for everybody, right? And things not making sense is frustrating for everybody. But for me and other holistic people, it doesn't stop us from moving forward. It's like, oh,
yeah,
I don't know that. That makes me uncomfortable, but I cannot know it and be uncomfortable and still continue forward and process things continuously. Or this doesn't make sense to me now, I can just wait, it'll probably make sense later. Or I can, even though I'm frustrated that it doesn't make sense or annoyed, I can put that in my back
Yeah.
pocket. I mean, that's such a thing, right? Autistics
Because it
struggling to
comes
put
down to
things in their back
how
pocket.
sorry, because it comes down to how critical that information is, right? And I think this is also something that you as an autistic person or an AuDHD person have to figure out, is the difference between discomfort and fear. Because if you would have initially started on this journey of learning in order to not get in trouble, in order to not make the wrong expression or not say the wrong thing or not give the wrong answer, or just to know when you wake up what you're supposed to do next, literally with your body, it comes down to that level. And so not knowing in those situations can be dangerous, or you've learned previously that there are consequences to saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing. And then so anytime you come across the feeling of not having an answer, it brings to mind that fear of like, oh, then I don't know what I'm going to do next, and then you literally start glitching. Or even just, if I don't know this, then I don't know this other thing, and that means I don't know this other thing, and then maybe my entire data set is going to cascade down. And so it's important to be able to know, okay, this discomfort is coming up first because this is an unknown situation, but is this knowledge something I need in order to like know how to operate my body, or in order to like know how to do my job or to go to school or to interact with the people around me I depend on? Or is this just something I don't know, but it doesn't have any specific significance on the choices I need to make? And I think that's sort of the difference, is that for holistic people, I guess, there's sort of nothing that's necessary, I guess, in terms of information for you just to feel like you're alive and you know what to do with your limbs and you know how to move in the world. And so all discomfort can just be just all discomfort of not knowing can just be discomfort as opposed to fear. And for autistic people, there's discomfort that's fear, because if you don't know this information, that's actually a pretty big deal. And then there's discomfort that is, I don't know, but it's also fine. And sort of finding like your way of figuring that out, I think, is also a really important part of this journey.
The way I deal with that discomfort is to turn the unknown into data. And simply, imagine if like there are boxes to tick and you like, it's either answer A or answer B. Well, I add a third answer, which is I don't know. And if in my mind I have it officially, it's one possibility of ticking that box, then it makes things much easier rather than still hesitating between, oh, is it A, is it B, is it A, is it B? No, just add a third one, which is data as well. I can give an example. When I'm in a group of people, for instance, and, moving in group that's very, like, that requires, like, who makes the decision? Where do we decide to go? How does the decision get made? And sometimes that can be very frustrating for my autistic brain. And often I just need to know that officially the goal is to just wander around. Because I usually need to have a direction. If you don't give me a direction, there's no data, there's a question mark. That stresses me. But if you tell me the direction is that we don't have a direction and we just wander around, then I will interpret it as this is an answer. This is still a direction for me, even though we don't know where we're going, but at least that's data. So this is how I cope with it, and I can be chill and just follow the group.
I think so many AuDHD people or autistic people who also have an addiction of learning, which I think becomes inevitable when you have to learn in order to survive or function, just think of it as like a quirk or a trait or this annoying thing you're doing to yourself. Or why do I always have to know? You're like, because you can't move without the knowing. Like the default situation is movement happens automatically, knowing is secondary. That's everybody else's bag. That's not ours. The knowing is primary. You only do after you know. It's not your fault that without knowing you are literally just like paralyzed. You're inert until there is information that can move you. So it's okay that means you will live with a voracious hunger for information your whole life. The only important thing then is to remember why the information seeking is happening, which is just how do I order my steps? How do I move? How do I make choices? And if you can keep remembering that that's what it is, it anchors everything else from the I can put in I don't know, and actually it doesn't matter because I don't have to make a choice right now, or I can do this other thing, or whatever. But it's not like a thing we're doing to ourselves on a whim or for a quirk, and it's not a thing that's happening to you for no reason. It's just that in order for you to replace what is not there, you need data.
Yeah.
Yeah, I one of the things that I work with my clients is coming up with that third option, or like a new rule, right? As soon as there is a rule in place, then you can follow the rule. As soon as there is a structure, there's an expectation that is clear, then you can make that choice. It's the lack of clarity that can be dysregulating is what I see so often. And so that's one of the tools that we use. One of the things that I do notice, though, that I just want to put out there for the autistics that are very dysregulated that are listening to this and are like, I can't give myself the I don't know option. I can't do that. It doesn't work for me. In my experience, there has to be a certain level of nervous system regulation to be able to have that amount of flexibility. Like flexible thinking is an executive function. That's why ADHDers struggle with it to some extent as well. If you're AuDHD, you might struggle with it more than either one. But autistic, that monotropism, that particular way of autistic thinking really can be very rigid if you are dysregulated. And so many autistics are sort of stuck in fight or flight or stuck in freeze to the point that they do become very rigid. And I know some autistics will say like, oh, it's not rigid thinking, it's this or that. For some people it is. Just like some autistics will say, oh, it's not that I can't read social cues. But for some autistics, it is that they can't read social cues, right? This is a spectrum. But I think that the regulation piece with all of this is very important, that your ability to access tools for this struggle is reliant on your ability to regulate to some extent. And so if you are unable to do this, my recommendation is to start with, working with someone if you can, or figuring out how to change your environment, or, do somatic therapy or EMDR or something to work on your nervous system first. And then you should be able to have a better ability to access some of these tools that we're going to talk about. And so Daisy, speaking of that, how did you build this structure? Like, how did you come to finding some sense making in the world that you could feel at peace with?
Well, I think by just moving through the world, you're continuously taking in information, whether that's in the conversations you're having, watching people in the streets and what they're doing, talking to other people, reading. I think literature was probably my biggest entry point. But what I mean to say is that you are continuously taking in information. The challenge then is synthesizing it into whatever your map will be, finding, like you say, those rules of play of like, now I have this one, so I know what to do in this situation. And so I think whatever entryway you end up choosing, whether that's looking at minerals or animals or people's expressions or reading literature or watching movies, it doesn't really matter. I think mine ended up being all of the above because it just became clear that very quickly, in order to sustain the amount of learning I needed to do to keep making my way through each situation successfully, that learning itself became like a satisfying kink, became itself a source of dopamine. So then I just was learning everything from every source I could all the time. And I think a lot of autistic people share that. So I think the real challenge then is in kind of continuing to keep that information clear and integrated and synthesized. And I think the real trick for that is using the information as far as possible, is having conversations with people, is writing, is whatever will mean that you are continuously taking all that data that you've stored somewhere and turning it into something. So making new rules, giving other people advice, giving yourself advice, but continuing to use it so that your data set and that overall map you have is as coherent as possible, and you know why you've stored different things. And also, I think the flip of that is just allowing that there's just background information you might not use, that you've consumed an entire lexicon of like Greek histories, and maybe you won't end up using those at all, but you happen to consume those because you had become a learning addict, because you've been trying to learn in order to compensate. Because I think at the end of the day, the most important thing is just, are you having a good experience of life while you're here? And if to have that good experience, you need a certain amount of information, and you need to be able to synthesize that information. Then it's those three pillars: is your tool set, which is your body and your mind, is it able to do what it needs to do? Because this is hard cognitive labor and it's hard creative work. And so do you have what you need to be nervous system regulated? And then if you do have that, then so that you are able to take in information, you are able to store information, and you're able to synthesize that information into outcomes, then, allow yourself to do so. You are naturally going to be drawn to consume, because that is a dopaminergic activity and we're drawn into that. And if you trust and allow that everything is about everything, so whatever you're learning about will in some way be useful in whatever you ultimately need, then you don't need to go looking for sources of like, should I be reading more about Buddhism, or should I be going to consume all of the books from, behavioral psychologists, or whatever the case may be. And there's no particular source. There's just is your tool set available, and are you continuing to open yourself up to the world so that you are taking in things from whatever source you're taking in? And then as you're taking that in, are you making use of it? Are you thinking about the things that you've learned and taken in relation to the day-to-day choices that you're trying to make, so that you're continuously using that information so it's clear and it's coherent, but also that you're continuing to remind yourself what the game is that you're playing, which is, I'm learning so that I can live, and I'm making sure I'm well so that I can learn, so that I can live. And at the end of the day, if I'm living and I'm able to wake up and do things sequence one after the other that broadly bring me joy and rest and these things, then that's all the outcome is about. And so it doesn't matter that there's a bunch of superfluous information to that you're not going to use. And it doesn't matter if there's a bunch of information missing that you don't always, have exactly the right answer in any given situation. It just matters that there's enough, that there's some data around in your head that you can bring to bear in order to order your steps from moment to moment.
What I really like about what you said is the reminding yourself that this whole thing, the whole reason why you're doing it is also to live and to hopefully enjoy life. And I think that this is particularly relevant for the autistic mind, because I always say that autistic people feel with their thoughts and they think with their feelings. So these two things, those wires get easily crossed, which in itself is not a problem. But sometimes what tends to happen, something that I'm working on in therapy, and I've been working for 4 years and I'm still not there, but what tends to happen is that we end up intellectualizing in order to not feel, or even if it's not the intention, but that is the result. We end up not feeling, not experiencing, because we treat everything as information. And while we're treating it as information, we're not actually taking it in. We're not allowing our body to feel it. We're not allowing ourselves to react to it, to feel it. So yes, it's great that you constantly also remind yourself that yes, you're intellectualizing, you're making sense of things, you're treating everything as data, but the goal is to have a good time. The goal is to live life.
Exactly. And I
Yeah.
think the feelings thing is so critical because people also forget sometimes that you're like, not only is feeling your feelings part of the experience, and the experience is the point, experiencing life is the point, your feelings themselves are information, but you can't use that information if you don't feel them. Like if you cut off the
Yeah.
feeling and then try to already pre-label it with some data that you have, then you're not going through the experience of feeling the feeling, so you won't get good data from it. You don't actually know what you're feeling if you're just like, aha, I got it, I labeled this one already, moving along. It then just gets stored as like, bullshit stress in your body, and then you have like issues with your joints and whatever. So apart from that consequence, you also don't get to yield the full data from it that you would if you lived the experience of feeling the feeling all the way to the end, and you're like, so that's how I feel about this kind of situation and this experience. That is another useful data set or piece of data that I'll add to the fullness. So even if you don't believe in the idea that the experience is the point and feeling your feelings is part of the experience, and that's valid, and you think you can optimize life to the point where you don't have to feel your feelings, then you should certainly at least be able to recognize that you won't be able to yield information from those feelings if you don't feel them. But certainly the experience is the point. Like literally, what else are we doing here? It cannot just be the learning for its own sake. It has to be for something, and it might as well be the thing that makes the most sense, which is for you to experience life on this planet as far as you can, given the system that you've come here with.
Yeah, one of the things I wanted to add to that too is, he's saying like we need to learn because just basically because of trauma, right? Like in order to not be in trouble or things like that. But I actually see in ADHD and autistic and definitely AuDHD people, and I experience this myself, just a deep joy with learn. I mean, for me personally, all I want to do is learn things and teach things and learn things and teach things. That's just like, I want to learn things and then talk to people about them. And just, that's all I want to do for the rest of my life. And not because I need to make sense of anything, and not because I'm afraid of being in trouble, but just because it brings me such joy. It tickles my brain. I get the serotonin and the dopamine and the oxytocin all at once when I'm connecting with people around this sort of thing. You know what I mean? And I see that for a lot of autistics. And then I also see the, again, with that regulation piece, if you're depressed and you're stressed and you're in fight or flight all the time, and you're just thinking, I have to learn in order to survive. And getting out of that and finding the joy in the learning, I think is, really good if possible. And it's a privilege, and having the time to sit and learn things and the access to learning things is a privilege. And just naming those things, for the listeners who might be having these thoughts. And then, like you were saying, there are some dangers maybe in this process, because it is such a dopamine heavy activity, going down a rabbit hole and figuring things out. There is a connection between psychosis and connection making, right? People making a bunch of connections can lead them into types of psychosis, and psychosis can lead people to find connections that aren't really there, right? There's obviously a connection with dopamine and psychosis. Too much dopamine will create psychosis. That's why, unfortunately, people who are like ADHD and schizophrenic can't take ADHD meds. They're usually on something that is suppressing dopamine, and that's always in people with bipolar and ADHD or AuDHD. So the medications can be an issue for this reason. And so there are some potential downsides to really going down this rabbit hole. And one of those is, like you were saying, losing connection with the feelings and just becoming too heady, which is definitely, I think ADHD and AuDHD and autistics are all more likely to become more like two in our heads and less in our bodies. And so, yeah, Daisy, do you want to speak to some of the sort of pitfalls that you've come across, or that you might warn people about?
Exactly. And so I think there's multiple levels of it. There's one that it is, physically it's a lot of strain to be doing so much cognitive activity. So then there's the like fact of you're using dopamine and then also gaining dopamine from the process of continuous learning. You spend in the search and then you get a huge surge of it back then when you receive anything. And so first that can like build up until you are just flooded with dopamine in a way that is like you've taken a heroic dose of every upper that has ever existed. And then that means the speed and intensity with which you are pursuing information and synthesizing information is so much that can only crash. And that can either crash in a way then that means that your body is fried and then that's a depression, or it can just mean that you are not fit for operating heavy machinery, like making choices or communicating with people. And so you synthesize the wrong information, you make the wrong conclusions, and that is psychosis and the damage that can come from that. But even aside from what it is physically to just be running the engine so fast and so hot in order to gather information, there's also just information itself and then all the ways in which that can be challenging. So having a lot of information for a situation sometimes means that you have much more than is useful, because remember, the thing that you're trying to replicate is automaticity in other people. They're just vibing. And so you've seen what they're doing, and you've gathered all this data to replicate the same thing, but yours is so precise that it's unfit, or it's so disproportionate that it's unfit, or the amount of information you have to bring to bear in a given situation means that you are so alienated from the actual experience that's happening there, even if you're performing correctly, that you feel deeply alone, or you still feel that you can't win because you're still saying or doing the wrong thing no matter how much you've gathered. So that is also a challenge and something to be managed. And then there's also just the fact that there is only so much that you can hold at once, and any of the spheres you will go down are quite separate things. So there is learning about the history of the world and social justice, so you can understand how people can come to say and do certain things, so you can take that into account in relating to them. And there's learning about the material reality of the world and the structures of that and how that influences you and how you came to be. There's all sorts of spheres, and holding that in place or being able to find what you need in a given situation, all of that is also a challenge. There's the fact that the more you learn, the less you might want to do the things that you set out learning for. So the less you are interested then in talking to people, because now you've gotten into this dopamine, you can give yourself what you need essentially and just run on that. And then so why go out into the world and engage with people for real when you can just stay there pursuing something to its nth degree? And that also, shout out to the people who live their whole lives pursuing a certain information all the way to the end. I'm not knocking you. If that is the safety and the sanctuary you find, then that's fine. But there is something to be said for continuously trying to maintain balance, trying to learn letting yourself learn, but remembering that nothing is perfect. There's nothing that you're here for. There's nothing that is an absolute good, and learning is included in that. That there is such a thing as too much or too little. There is such a thing as getting full and it feeling toxic. There is such a thing as it feeling pointless at some point. If you go all the way down and you have your aha and you turn around, you realize it's just knowing, and there's actually nothing you can do with it necessarily. And maybe you come back and give it to people and they don't care, or you give it to yourself, and after the high of knowing, you're still here and you still exist, and then you still have to live your life and make choices and order your steps. So I think all of the dangers, both in terms of chemically the ups and the downs that relate to it, in terms of the strain and the stress and the tiredness of it, in terms of the feeling like you have to do so much more than other people do just to function, in terms of the fact that it can trap you and then hold you in a way that means you have no time or energy for anything else, even though it is just one way to be in the world. They're all manageable, I think, by coming back to that why. You're doing this because you're already here and you might as well have the best time you can here. And that includes trying to live and taste and see and touch and experience things and understand enough for there to be meaning in the things that you're seeing and tasting and touching and doing. And so I think if you can hold on to that, it'll continuously ground you, both in terms of managing the physical experience of using this engine in the ways that you will for this, and also managing some of the emotional toll of both knowing too much and knowing too little, and knowing what is irrelevant for the situation you're in, and all those other experiences that come with trying to be this way.
And also keeping in mind that the best way to know is to live, to experience. And what can happen is sometimes one of the pitfalls is that we end up learning not from a place of curiosity, but from a place of fear. We are afraid to actually go out in the world and experience things and potentially risk being disappointed, being rejected, all of those things. So we think that the best way to deal with it is to lock ourselves in our room and learn from the internet, from books, etc. But the best way of learning is still to go out there and talk to people and potentially be disappointed, potentially be uncomfortable. And of course, there's always the question, what's the difference between being uncomfortable and being unsafe? And we don't want to be unsafe, and I would not advocate for anyone to put themselves in danger, physical or emotional. But sometimes learning to be uncomfortable, that also enables us to live.
Yeah. And life is what
Yeah.
will always balance out the learning, because even just the fact that you doing life is what spends some of that dopamine and some of that energy. So at least the like vicissitudes of having to engage with your fellow man will bring you back down from the, is that the shape of God? So that's important. But also it grounds you. It keeps reminding you that you're a person. That's what you're here to do, regardless of the seeming mundanity of it in comparison to the sheer scale of all this work just so I could have a chat with the guy at the cafe. Yeah, actually, yeah, that is what it is for. And that's fine. And it's absurd, and it's also kind of wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things, when you think about how we check that information is good and valid is that it's peer reviewed, right? Any sort of research or whatever, like it needs to be peer reviewed in order to be considered valid. It needs to be able to be recreated by other people. And so as much as you can go down the rabbit hole of finding information on your own and discover something amazing, and many people, definitely a lot of autistic people over the centuries have come up with great discoveries by sitting in a room in their tunnel, but most of them had a wife that was giving them a lot of, of help. You know what I mean? And so like having other people to be checking with, for one, for the quality of the information, and two, for, like you said, to keep yourself grounded, and so that you don't fly off into the clouds and kind of go somewhere else. And this is why I think one of the other things that now is a new like new fear unlocked for me is the use of AI for this process. And I have seen a few people go into psychosis. I mean, AI psychosis is becoming more and more common, but and autistic people are more susceptible to psychosis. And I think the combination of this process with AI and like autism together, like I think that that's something, having this feedback loop where you're not being checked, there's no grounding, I think that that's something that people need to be aware of, because it is much more scary to do this with a person who's going to judge you, and the risk of misunderstanding is so painful, particularly for an autistic person, but for everybody. But there's a particular pain in an autistic person feeling misunderstood, and like you're working so hard to explain yourself and it's not being understood. And that is a risk with every alive human being, even other autistic ones. And AI will understand you, right? If you just have to put in the right codes, but it's not a person, right? It's not actual understanding. It's just regurgitation. And that's something that I think is, something that needs to be in the communication in the autistic community, is how AI, as much as it can be an incredible tool and accommodation, can also really be a danger in keeping humans from being humans and interacting with other humans. And that there, as much as trauma as you might have with other humans, there still is a benefit to it, as Joris was saying, and
Yes,
both of you were saying.
I think something important for people to keep in mind is truth is a shared possession. So there is all the information in the world, and then there is what we have agreed to take into account and use for the day-to-day interactions that constitute society. We can quibble about the quality of what is included in that, but that is what we are using. That data set is what's relevant for you moving through the world. So whatever you're gathering about the all, being able to continuously come and check of but what is the agreed set that's canon that we're using, so that when I talk to this person, when I interact with this person, we're on the same page. That just means no matter what else you're collecting, you have to be talking to people. Otherwise, you can't verify the original thing you sought out to get, which is, what is the the canon with which I can function in the world. You can go seek everything else, you can take everything else, because stuff is going to come at you anyway, but you have to keep going to check of what am I using, and then the rest you can either ignore it and it's superfluous, you can still go and say I want to synthesize this, it's important, I want to keep it, I think it's true, but then you have to separate out your everything else that I'm thinking about and collecting from the what have we all agreed on. Even if I quibble with whether or not it's perfect, it is still what is, and so it's what you have to keep refining and keep using, and that's the core of your mission. And then everything else is, well, since I've become addicted to learning anyway, why don't I learn even outside of that canon and see if maybe I'm the one who introduces new truths, or if I'm not, I just have the smug satisfaction of knowing. But that's all secondary, because you're still primarily here to be and to experience and to be well, and all the things that that entails in terms of interacting with people and relying on them and experiencing them amicably. That is all based on the canon. And the canon is shared possession, and you can only verify that you're that you have the canon by engaging with other people. So yeah, the point is to use what you learn, to go and talk to people and have arguments and talk and disagree and agree and whatever else, and keep saying, okay, this is what is conventional agreed truth, and this is what I'm working with. And then also anything else that I don't know where that goes in relation to this, that's my fun pet project that I use my mind that's already running hot anyway, because I have to keep relying on it, and I use that to decide what I do with that. Is it integratable? Is it not? I don't know. I have it anyway, but I also have canon, and that's its own core mission, and that's its own core responsibility. And I think you owe it to yourself to be able to have as good and cogent a one as possible, and to take care of it and be proud of it. It's like this artifact that is like, it's like you create your own familiar and you move through the world with it, and your familiar just happens to be this giant data set of what is agreed truth in the world around you. And so I think that's one way to think about it.
Thank you so much for this. I think this is really going to help a lot of autistic and AuDHD people. And so, Daisy, if people wanted to hear more from you, where would they go and look?
So I've vomited everything I've ever thought really about myself or people or brains or how things work onto Instagram and a podcast and YouTube. And so if you go to my Instagram, Daisy Vero, everything is there. And then from there, there's a link to a milkshake that has basically everything I've ever done and my whole coming of age and everything I learned along the way. So I would recommend going to Instagram, and then from there you can click that link and you can watch the podcast, you can do whatever you want, but I have put it all out there so that I can rest in peace at my ripe old age of 32.
Yeah, as I always say, there's literally no point in being right if we're the only one knowing it. So yeah, that really shows that being right, and very often autistic people can focus a little bit too much on what is the truth, what am I right, what is the correct answer. But the whole point is to communicate, to share it with other people. If our reality isn't shared, then is it really reality? I don't know. I would venture to say that not really. So the whole point is to share this. Well, thank you very much for this episode. I think of the 4 episodes we've recorded so far, this was the most profound, the deepest one. And at the same time, I wouldn't be able to tell you what the topic was. It was the most nebulous and at the same time, the most profound. So I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much. Thank you, Daisy. Thank you, Sheila.
Amazing. And also, Daisy and I have in the works this idea of making a class that's kind of like a workshop to lead people through creating their own sense-making process. So our sense-making map. If that's something that you're interested in, please put that in the comments, and we can make sure that you get on a list, or just maybe just get encouragement to get it going. Thank you so much, Daisy. It's been so good having you here. This is really interesting conversation.
Thank you. It's been amazing being here, and it feels like such a nice seal and wrap up of the journey. I feel like I am no longer assembling a data set. I'm just now living in the aftermath of pursuing it so intensely. So I'm like, oh, what a nice seal. I can tell everybody else, you don't have to learn everything. Like 30% of this would have been enough to live well and happy, but what can you do? Sometimes the rabbit hole is very slippery and you fall all the way down. So yeah, thanks.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing your wisdom, and hopefully people will go and find you and learn more from you. Please find Daisy on Instagram and her website and follow her everywhere. And also join the Meerkat Squad Patreon and like, subscribe, comment all of those things. What has been your journey with this process in the comments? Thank you so much. Goodbye, everyone.